turn my camera off, but I'll sit here for a minute just in case.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Rachel. Good evening, everybody, especially in Canada. It's an hour later, right?
Yes.
Awesome. We'll let folks get settled a minute before we get started. Tammy, it's so nice to see you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's very
Oh,
fun.
it's our pleasure. I had planned to dip into your book and read it over a few weeks, and I ended up reading it in 2 sittings.
Oh, well, good. I hope those were two good sittings that you.
Very good sittings. Loved it. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm happy to see we have a bunch of people on. Sorry for the late start, folks. We had a little bit of a technical hiccup, but very happy to have you all on board tonight. My name is Mary, and I'm a bookseller and an event coordinator at Belmont Books in Belmont, Massachusetts. We are a thriving independent bookstore located just outside of Boston, and it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Tammy Armstrong for her magical new book, Pearly Everlasting. Before we get into why that we are especially excited to host this event, let me tell you a little bit about Tammy this evening. Tammy is the author of 5 books of critically acclaimed and award-winning poetry and 2 novels published in Canada, and one of her poems was finalist for a national magazine award. Her work has appeared in Canadian Geographic, Nimrod, Prairie Fire, and New England Review, among others. And Pearly Everlasting is her U.S. debut novel. A former Fulbright scholar, Tammy holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia and a PhD in literature and critical animal studies from the University of New Brunswick. She lives in a lobster fishing village on the south shore of Nova Scotia. Lucky you, Tammy. So here's where the serendipity comes in. Belmont Books is a really cool, wonderful, independent bookstore that is really kind of an integral part of our community. We're located just outside of Boston, and inside of our store, there's a cafe that serves delicious hot and cold drinks, pastries, soup, teas, lots of coffee, kind of anything you need. And the name of our cafe is called the Black Bear Cafe. And its namesake is none other than Bruno the Black Bear, who's featured in Pearly Everlasting. While Tammy's book is fictional, Bruno was a very real bear. So the serendipity here is just really kind of cool. And I fell in love with your book, and we fell in love with Bruno the Bear. When our owners opened the bookstore 7 years ago, they were looking for kind of an authentic name for the cafe. And they did a little research, and their son actually shared the story about Bruno the Black Bear because his 2nd grade class had gone to the historical commission and learned about this black bear. Anyway, he's our store mascot. We have a giant bear that kids read books in. I'll pop some pictures into the chat so you can see. But Bruno was real, and your story made him come to life sort of magically for us. So we're super excited to hear more about your take on Bruno, and know that you have a partner in Belmont, Massachusetts.
I love that when my publicist, Stephanie Mendoza, first contacted me about your bookstore, and I was like, and you have a Bruno on your on your
We do.
masthead. I
Yep.
love it so much. I'm so excited.
Very cool. So Bruno, just to give you a tiny bit of the backstory here, William Lyman Underwood lived in Belmont, and he was a wildlife photographer, among other things. The other things were he and his family were the Underwood deviled ham people, if you've ever had Underwood deviled ham. He was a scientist from MIT who developed the technology that enabled canned foods, and that's where his family made all their money, but his passion and his love was nature photography. So he heard about this little bear in Maine, and he went and found the actual family, and I'll pop a couple of the photos into the chat over the conversation this evening, but he actually met the family and befriended them. And the mother didn't want anything except she asked him, would the Underwood family take the bear when he got to be too big? And he did. And he came and he lived in Belmont for about 2 years, and he did get too big. And he was moved to an animal habitat just north of Boston and lived out his years there. But just a cool little story. But Tammy, would you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in the story? When I was reading your bio to prepare for tonight, I admit I hadn't heard of critical animal studies. And when I looked it up and I Googled it and I saw what it was, your book, it became so clear to me how you must have used your academic background and your love for nature, which is certainly very apparent. But I'd love to see hear how the lens of critical animal studies married up in your beautiful novel.
Sure. So I was working academically on, when I was doing my doctorate work, critical animal studies was more of like an umbrella group. It's sort of split now into animal justice, but I was looking at it then as like the philosophy of the animal. So looking at how do animals, how do we place them when we're such a language-based species? And what happens in literature when you have animals that are troubling spaces, maybe highlighting something about ourselves? They're more than human. They can see things we can't see. They can, they have these senses that we don't have. And how do we reconcile thinking of ourselves more superior when we are humbled constantly by animals? So I looked at it primarily through poetry, and how, because poetry works through metaphors and can torque language in ways that makes you look at things in a new way. And that's what animals can do for us too. So I was doing this doctorate work and the academic work, and I really wanted to approach it through fiction. I wanted to write a story about animals. I love animal stories. And I had a few false starts, and then they weren't working. And then I went to visit my mother in Maine, and she has bears all around her house all the time. She had one 3 days ago crawling around on her porch. And yeah, she's like a magnet for black bears. And she gave me an excerpt that was in one of those free magazines in Maine, Down Easter, I think it was. And it was from William Lyman Underwood's Wild Brother. And it was the excerpt where he first went to Aroostook County in the winter looking for the Weldon family and came across them, and she's nursing a baby and an orphan cub, which was Bruno. So that was the initial spark between, how can I write a story that is going to, I don't want this animal to be a pet. It's a very strong bond between two different species that love each other very much. So how could I write that, and what kind of story would it be? And that just seemed like, it's realistic, but it's also this fairy tale melding of, it's such a bizarre telling of this woman in this lumber camp and so far away from everything. And I just loved it. And that's where the story started.
Oh, it was just like I just got so immersed in it right away. I love books where setting becomes a character. Your descriptions of the natural world, the bird song, the snow, the trees, the flora, the fauna, kind of everything are very much characters in the book. How did you capture this world so effectively, and your ability to just bring us there was just kind of amazing. I'd love to hear more about. You certainly have a lot of knowledge of the natural world, but how did that sort of weave into your book?
Well, I've always found I'm attracted to and find that place is a character in itself. Um, and it's not a backdrop in a story, it defines so much of the story. And I was lucky, I guess, to grow up in a fairly rural area, you know, where my mother would give me a bag of granola and say, there you go out and come back when you get hungry. So I was able to go out in all weather and trek through the woods and, you know, trek along the water with my dog, and I had that kind of freedom to just, you know, I remember as a kid just going out with a book, you know, like this is sphagnum moss, this is Pearly Everlasting growing here. And so learning, having, you know, that sort of inclination that I want to know, what is this called, what does this do, and being interested in that, but also being immersed from a very young age that that world is something that you can travel through and learn from, I think. And so I tried to bring as much of that New Brunswick landscape into the story.
Oh, you did it masterfully. I could smell the fir boughs where they slept, and I could just feel
Oh,
the
good.
snow in the air and the mud and the ice, and you know, it just you kind of got. I had to put a blanket on when I was reading the story because I felt like I was there, which is always a good sign when you're so immersed in the book that you're part of that world. One of the themes that resonated so powerfully with me was that of family, and
Mhm.
both Pearlie's birth family, but also her chosen family. The workers at Camp 33 became her family, and the men in the camp were so loyal to Pearlie and to her whole family, because of the food and the healing and the sharing of ideas and the sense of identity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that sense of loyalty and family and what it meant to Pearlie?
Um, yeah, I think there's sort of, when I first started looking up lumber camps, and I grew up with family who worked in lumber camps during that time, and there's always sort of this misconception in some fiction that it seemed like it was these rough places, and you know, it was like the Wild West or something, and it really wasn't. They were dry camps. People were there to work. They had to work very hard. It was very dangerous, and you have to rely on each other a lot because you're so far away. I mean, they're 50 miles out from anywhere. So you become very quickly, you know, some sort of hardscrabble sort of family because the guy standing beside you who needs to communicate that this tree is going this way, you need to know exactly what's happening, or the horses are going this way, or and so they tend to, the lumbermen, because they follow Pearlie's father, because he's such a wonderful cook. He's one of the best cooks. So everyone wants to be in his camp. So a lot of them have kind of watched Pearlie and Bruno grow up. So there is that kind of affection. You know, she takes her, they give her that dull knife and little jackknife, and she keeps asking them to sharpen it when they're sharpening everything, and they pretend to sharpen it for her, and you know, and they carve her little things or things for Bruno and make his collar. So they are this family of sorts that um they care for each other, and they're always watching out. I mean, they let Bruno and Pearlie be free, but they're watching out for them too and making sure that they're safe.
Mhm. It's as if Pearlie had 20 big brothers.
Yeah, I kind of thought of it in places like it was like Snow White and all the dwarves were kind of, you know, because they're out working in the woods and then they come back, but they're always checking on her. And yeah.
Perfect. I like that image even better. Now I can picture them following her around. Um, Part of the story that also, I come from a family where my brother is in a union, and the whole issue, how dangerous it was, and how these men were being overworked and in unsafe conditions, and how they were being cheated and swindled. That was such an interesting part of the book that, um, I don't know, it really kind of drew me in beyond the world of, the injustice to the animals and the things that we've done, to our natural world. those sort of social justice issues were very prevalent in the story too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, we're talking about like in the 30s during the Depression era. So it wasn't a really strong period for unions. I mean, and if you were were trying to set up unions, there was a lot of union busters. Um, Lumber camps were not ideal for that because they were so transient. So, you know, you come for part of the season, you may get to stay on until, you know, they're doing the log drive, you may not. So you may go someplace else and pick up another job. So they weren't places that you had a secure place. You didn't go back to the same camp every year. That camp was torn down and another camp. So, and you're also talking about a province that has, you know, historically exploited a lot of workers, from coal mining to gypsum mining to, you know, to the lumber camps. And so that was something that was really important to me, that they were um, incredibly poor people who were
Mhm.
still being cheated at
Right.
very little money considering what the lumber, you know, companies would be making off their backs, and that the men knew this, but they didn't have a lot of choice in it. I mean, they needed that job. So when they threatened to walk off because, you know, the camp boss is being cruel to Bruno and to the family, that's a, you know, that shows their loyalty, but also showed that they had a lot to lose for a few dollars a day is basically what they were making.
Yeah, it was kind of gut wrenching when you realized, when you actually thought about logging, first of all, taking the timber down, but then floating it down the river, and all the danger that was inherent in all of the things that these men did for pennies. And
Yeah,
it was really disturbing.
yeah, it was an incredibly dangerous job.
Yeah. One of my favorite characters in the book was Songcatcher.
Mhm.
I loved thinking about that there was a person who wanted to keep the stories and the folklore and the natural language of people so present and vibrant. And I also loved Ebony, and they made such a great pair. But uh, Songcatcher, sorry, the way she was so just driven to capture these voices really kind of resonated with me. And I almost felt like Ebony um, and Songcatcher were sort of the bridge of wisdom that Pearly needed when she had to go to the outside world. And I could almost hear sort of their voices, and it felt like they helped this naive young girl kind of, when she was forced to go outside. I could hear their voices. Tell me a little bit about what inspired Songcatcher and Ebony. And Ebony was so funny. Like, she really made me laugh. And at times you really needed that humor. So I especially appreciated her character. And the bad haircut, everyone's had one. We could all
Everyone's had a
we
bad
could all
haircut.
Relate to the bad haircut.
True, we've all had the bad haircut. Songcatcher was in the beginning, I was inspired by an ethnomusicologist from the Maritimes. I'm going to say the Maritimes because I don't think she went to Newfoundland. I might be wrong about that. Named Helen Creighton, who in the 20s, 30s, and 40s did travel around the Maritimes here collecting. She was collecting Mi'kmaq paddling songs and songs that came across in the coffin boats and sea shanties, ghost stories. So she had this wonderful collection of thousands and thousands of songs. Some of them that are, you know, they're the same songs that are sung in Appalachia from history, you know, because there's German, Scottish, English, Irish, you know, Mi'kmaq, Maliseet. And so she collected all of those. And I thought she would be a really great bridge, like you said, because she's from the outside, but she's continuously coming back and forth with Ebony between those two worlds. And so she's sort of a balance that can also help Pearly when she comes out because she's never seen electricity, she's never seen running water, she's never seen a street or a sidewalk or a car or anything like that. So they work almost like aunts, I guess, to sort of help guide her, but they respect that she's, she's going to make some decisions that are maybe not the best decisions, but at least they can try to help her. And they also bring news with them from the outside into the camps. So I think that they work as a sort of a conduit between the two very different worlds that Pearly ends up having to negotiate.
Mm. I also really enjoyed the relationship between Pearly and Ivy and how different they were, and how two people growing up in the exact same environment could be so different. And
Yeah.
I could just picture the Sears Roebuck catalog pictures on their little lean-to. I could, you could just picture sort of their dynamic. I don't want to give away the story for folks that haven't read it, but the transition that they go through together, and how Pearly struggles so much, given the loss in her family, and how I think it made her more determined to keep Bruno in her life. We call him Bruno.
Yeah, because he's a sibling to her. So, it's really important that especially when she realizes on the outside that um she's suddenly responsible. She has to be, it's all on her. And that's this moment where she's thinking like, I have to be responsible for both of us right now and make good decisions. There's no one else to help me. So yeah. He's a brother.
I can't imagine. I kind of forgot at times that she was a teenager. The experiences that she lived through, and the relationships, and just her familial, just how she grew up, and the poverty and no exposure to the outside world, and all the things that she had to kind of learn on her own, but that she was able to navigate a forest and sort of manage all the natural, challenges. It was just kind of amazing to me. She was so strong and so resilient. Can you talk to us about how you developed her character as you went through the story, and how someone who, maybe naive is not the right word, but she certainly had no exposure to anything of the modern times. And yet she was able to, figure it out. And the scenes where, she's in town and she refuses to wear a dress, and, all of those things, it made me remember she was a teenager, and yet she was able to kind of deal with any challenge that came to her. And it made me fall in love with her. She was just such a strong, resilient character.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really wanted her to be resilient, even though she is naive and she's a teenager, but she grows up in an environment where it's dangerous. And, I think she's had to grow up faster in some ways than other kids her age, because I mean, her mother is a healer who, they see injured men in her house all the time, and some of them don't come back. And so I think all of that, you know, makes her a little bit older in some ways than, and because she's in such a bare, meager environment in some ways, as far as material wise, I think when you don't come from a lot, then you have to use your own instincts and creativity more. And so when she is on the outside, she can handle some of that because she has learned some of that resiliency in the camps that, you know, if you're sick, these are the things that you have for medicine. Let's try some of these. Or if your roof collapses on one of your, this is what we have to do. So she knows a lot of, she would be great as a survivalist in the woods, but she doesn't know how to turn on a light or hot water. And so, but she's very interested in those. She has that curiosity too, that Like, okay, well, how does this work? You know, she doesn't want to be seen as being naive. She wants to, I'll figure it out. It's good.
One of the scenes that stuck in my brain was when she was learning how to ride a bike with Mr.
Oh,
Prue,
mhm.
and how she was just like, like any kid, but yet, someone who grew up the way she did, she probably didn't even know what it was.
No, yeah, she doesn't know what a bike is. She gets on it like a horse on the left
Right,
side.
right,
And he's like, why are you getting
exactly.
it's not gonna kick you. And she's like, no, no, I'm just gonna get it on the left side because that's how you get on a horse. You know, and
Right,
then she has Ruby May, the little girl who's biking all around her in circles,
right.
showing off while she's trying to get on this contraption that she doesn't even know what it is. She's never seen one before. And then when she starts riding it, then she's really sad because it's not going to be something she could take back to camp with her, that
Right.
you can't really
There's
bike.
no place for a bike in the woods.
Yeah. But
They
she comes
needed
through the
mountain
level.
bikes like we have bikes now, and then
Exactly.
she would have been totally cool. She would have been all
Yeah. She
set.
needs some flat tire bike for sure.
Exactly. There's a passage in the book that I read and reread like two or three times, more than that, probably like five times. And if you don't mind, I just want to read it. It's just a couple of sentences.
Yes.
It's a passage about how we move through the world. And it really just hit me. And this is when Mr. Prue was teaching her how to ride a bike. It's page 301 for anyone who might be taking notes. She says, besides the time in Ebony's backwards car, I'd not considered there were other ways to move through the world without touching the ground that did not involve sleds and horses. It felt good to travel in a way that made the world run blue and green with a kind of animal flight. When I read this passage and reread it, it felt like it was almost like an epiphany for Pearly, that it kind of bridged her worlds. It bridged the camp world and the world, the outside world that she was exposed to. And it kind of, to me, it connected her sort of unique relationship with her family and especially Bruno. And it made me feel like, with that realization, that she was going to be okay, that she was going to be able to kind of work through all the challenges still in front of her. But for some reason, it really felt like an epiphany, like she got to a place where she was able to kind of bring her disparate worlds together. Can you talk a little bit about sort of moving through the world and how Pearly moved through the world?
Sure. Up to that point, I think that she was, in a lot of ways, she was sort of shadowing the lumbermen. She kind of walked like them. She spits on the ground. She blows her nose on the ground. Like she's a little, and then when she gets that bike, she becomes like she's just like any other kid, who's having this fun moment where bikes are fun, and she just has this she's gone through so much, and then there's just a moment where it's like, I'm having fun. I'm having fun at this moment. I'm not going to worry about anything. And it just gives her that sort of, it gives her this moment of flight that she can then take back to the camps with her, that, she can't bring the bike with her, but it will be that memory that, oh, there are other ways that I can get through the world, and I can try new things. And because she's very frustrated trying on the bike because she keeps falling off. And then once she gets
Right.
it, then it's like, oh, that was worth it. That was really worth it.
Right. That's how I read it. It made me feel like she was able to say, oh, there's a different way to approach this or to look at this and to problem solve and to be resilient. And it felt to me like she kind of came into her own at that point.
Yeah, I think that it really gave her agency to learn to ride a bike and just look, you're doing it. And up to that point, too, being in the outside has been really difficult for her, and she feels like she's failing all the time. Everything is so
Right.
hard and people are hard, and so this is something that she achieved.
Mhm. Excellent. Where did the inspiration for the circus scene come from? That was like so like out of left field. I was thinking kangaroos in the woods. Like that was so
There
funny.
actually was a circus train that crashed in New Brunswick
Oh,
back in
you're
the
kidding. That's
1900s.
real.
Yeah, yeah, that really did happen.
Wow.
And they said that years and years later, when they were developing some of the the land, they would come across old, padlocks from cages and all kinds of little bits and pieces and things like that. And they really did bring in a bear hunter, some hunters, some moose hunters and stuff to track down some of these circus animals that had gotten loose that they needed to retrieve. So some of that actually was real, and it happened it was warm, so there were people sleeping, I think, on top as well, sleeping on top of the cars or getting like a free ride or something. So most of that was out of my own imagination, but the actual circus accident was real.
Wow. I could just imagine in the woods all those strange animals like at the end of the book. And it was,
That part is like, yeah, that was me.
No, I loved it. I thought that was like the best.
Kangaroos living wild in New Brunswick.
That was really great. Awesome. Um, the one of many menaces in the book was to me was the concept of Jack in the Dark, and it was such a menacing presence. And with Halloween coming up, I felt like it was just like the right time to sort of introduce spirits and sort of the underworld. Did you study about sort of the folklore and the superstitions of the time? Because Jack in the Dark seems to come around a lot. Like there's always like a creepy kind of menacing, you kind of always feel that. Is that something that you also spent time researching?
Well, Jack in the Dark is something I made up, but it came from a lumber when they're playing the game with the socks and the potatoes, where the blind men are blindfolded and they have to try to hit each other with this sock and a potato. That is actually a game that they called Jack in the Dark, and one person was blindfolded and then they would have to sort of follow the other one's voice to try to hit them. I think, it was a game that they would play on Saturday nights. And so I used that name, but the, lumber camps, any kind of dangerous job, sailors at that time period were very superstitious people, in particularly because it was very dangerous. So there's lots of don't do this, to keep you safe. And the forests in New Brunswick are very deep and dark. And, so I wanted to have that sort of menacing quality as well, that as she's walking with Bruno, she says sometimes, like, here's an old camp, I hope no one's buried here. Like, she has this fear all the time that, if they bury someone who was on the log drive, they just nailed their boots to a tree. And so she would be coming across those. So death is always very close in her world. It's not something that she's protected from, I guess. So the lumbermen who tell her these Jack in the Dark stories, which is usually they're just kind of kidding with her, she takes them very much to heart because she's out in the woods with Bruno, tramping around all the time with her imagination.
And she did have a very active imagination.
Very, yes.
You had to love that. Did you want to read a little bit tonight, Tammy? Was there a passage or anything you wanted to read, or should we open it up for questions from our attendees tonight?
I'll just read a little bit here.
Great.
Let's see, where did I put? Okay, so I'll just read like page and a half or so. This is on 150, page 152, if anyone's looking. And this is when Pearly and Bruno are coming from the outside and they're trying to get back to the camp, and she realizes they're really lost and there's a snowstorm coming. So this is just one scene here. So in the trees, the snow mantled the boughs so that they almost touched, making a sheltering tunnel that muted the wind. We walked through for a while and then followed the curve of the land. Steep enough I had to take off my mitts and undo my coat so I wouldn't overheat and turn my clothes to ice. Bruno sat under a cedar out of the wind, licking ice from his belly, waiting. We came out at the rim of a deep-set valley, tree-lined fields and the gray scarves of coming snow. The province spread out before us, much beyond my imaginings. but no real place to get out of the storm. I could think of nothing except hunching down beneath one of the bigger cedars. I didn't know how to do this part. From somewhere down in the valley's dimness, Bruno whined. I caught sight of his dark bulk, belly sliding backwards down the steep north-facing slope, blackened with frozen water. At the bottom, he fell on his rump, then tumbled over backwards, twice into the thigh-deep snow. He whined as he tried to right himself and then trundled back over to the rock wall, trying to catch his claws in the wet stone, but he could gain no purchase. God damn it, Bruno, you can't stay away from trouble 2 minutes, I said, starting down the valley on my backside. Can't look away for a sec without some catastrophe happening to you. Hand over hand, grasping at birch saplings growing slant to the rock face, I slid down into a scrabbled land, the foot of it darker than above. Bruno. Nothing. The narrow valley ended with a wall of slick rock, thick blue ice sheeting its high ridge. It was a frozen Sioux that dropped from a jagged shelf some 70 feet above. Bruno's whines came from there. As I stepped further into the valley, I tripped over something large and tined, half buried beneath the snow. 2 bull moose, locked antlers, their skulls conjoined, their foundered bones collapsed in such a way that I could see how one had suffocated the other. They died some time ago, and strangely, nothing had disturbed their kill site. Lost the battle and lost the war, I said, unwilling to stand too close to their deaths for long. With no way around them, I unlatched my snowshoes and clambered through their strew of bones. On the other side, I could see the frozen Sioux hid a cave walled with a sheet of ice except for a small gap. Bruno stood at its dark threshold, licking his frost-starred snout. Nice work, Bruni. I shinned the slim rock up to the cave's mouth. Inside, all sound disappeared where the rock angled into a deep wedge. There was just enough space for us to rest a spell behind the ice wall. Maybe this was like your first mom's den, eh? Bruno sucked at the cave's mouth, licking at the thick ice wall, unwilling to step all the way in. Eventually, in his own time, he shambled inside to watch me gather sticks and leaf duff from the cave's corners for a fire. He circled the dust and dead brush, making order out of the new scents. Stay here. Listen for once. Outside, I cut some boughs with my hatchet. I dragged in some windfall and broke the small branches off with my heel for kindling. Bruno was already knocking the wood around the cave, moving it elsewhere. Bring that back. I got a smoky fire near going. It sheened the damp rock and made the ice walls glow. I went back out to scrounge for some more boughs. Coming back with them shushing behind me in the snow, I paused outside the cave. The fire's pale light glowed like strange glass. A picture book church window, orange with fire, Bruno's shadow occasionally darkening the effect as he paced the small cave, poking his head out of the gap, waiting for my return. When I'd settled us, I pulled out our blanket and some supplies for another dinner and let them thaw near our meager fire. A little more heat got Bruno's steaming and softened my clothes. We ate what little we had, watching the snow fall beyond the gap. I wished Papa could see us, the only light for miles around flickering through the waterfall's ice. This adventure's just fine with me, I said to Bruno as I handed him the last of a biscuit with bologna. We'll be home in no time. We went to sleep that night to the soft sounds of melting ice, and nothing bothered us.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What was your friends and your family's reaction when you told them you were writing a story about a young girl who grows up with a brother bear?
My friends and family have all been incredibly, incredibly supportive, reading manuscripts, asking me questions, talking to me about it. They've all been really wonderful with. Sometimes I think they were like, how is that going to go? But they've all been very supportive and very grateful about that.
And how about your editor?
That
Was that a tough sell?
No, she was, and my agent, Rachel Latowski, they've both been very wonderful from the very beginning. They saw what this story could be. And I've been very grateful for all their work and input and support, and where the story started and where it is now, just with their guidance, has been incredibly humbling. Yes. Couldn't
And what are you working on now? Is it too soon to even ask that question? I know people, I think a lot of folks don't realize, nowadays when you're an author, turning in your manuscript is only like half of it, and you have to promote and do social media and help to sell the book and do all of those fun things. And I can imagine it's hard to sort of jump into the next project. But where are you on that spectrum? Are you actively working on something? And is it does it have any relation to Pearly and her world?
I've just finished a draft of a book that follows two sisters from Latvia in the Second World War to Canada, where they end up moving and living beside a lake that possibly has a lake monster in it. So it's more of a
Oh,
sister story. And I've finished some short stories. So I've been working on that. And I've been just starting to do some research on, I was in Florence with my husband in the summer, so I've been sort of looking at doing some research on a story that might look at the 1966 flood in Florence.
ah.
That seems to have a cat. There's a cat involved. That's all I can.
Is it a given that your books will all have animals in them?
I don't, it might. I love writing animals. I don't want to be like the animal writer, like, oh, Tammy, she always writes animals, but they just creep in. Like I'm not, they sneak
No,
in through the windows when they're open and
they feel very authentic. I meant that in the best possible way.
yes. I love animals. I love them very much, and they, the imaginative ones, they're just curled up around my feet while I'm writing. I think they just say, "Put me in your book too."
Excellent. So we have a question from one of our attendees. Something's wrong with the chat functionality. For some reason, I can't turn it on, and I think it has something to do with my hosting capabilities. But we do have a question. If folks have questions, please pop it into the Q&A, which seems to be operational. So this question is from Michelle, and she said, "Hi, Tammy. The Go Preacher was an interesting character. I'm wondering where that idea came from."
So Go Preachers were actual real preachers, and they had I think one of the other names is they were Come by Twos, I think was another one. And so they were these evangelical preachers who would go through the woods and preach at camps. And so even though a lot of the men were not necessarily religious, I mean, when they got out of the camps, they partied pretty hard sometimes, ended up in a county jail, and then went back to the camps. They weren't, you know, but they liked the Go Preachers coming because sometimes they would bring them news from the outside. They would bring them some reading material. Maybe they would bring sometimes clothes, and even the preaching on the Sunday, it broke up the monotony of being in the camps. So they were, I don't know so much if they were in New Brunswick, but they were very much in Maine and Minnesota and through some of the New Hampshire, some of those places that they would travel quite a ways throughout the winter and preach on Sundays.
Was it the men's need for like sort of interaction with anyone from the outside that made them, and obviously just a break in the routine, as you said, was that what made them so attractive to some of the workers?
Yeah, they from some of the oral interviews I read, none of them were looking to have their souls saved, but they were just happy to have someone new. I mean, they see just each other for months and months and months, and then the battery runs out on the radio, and so you can't listen to music. You can play some poker, but so it was just, yeah, they just like to have someone new in the camp to even ask like what's going on in the world. Find out.
Yeah. Even if they are thieves?
Even if they are, I don't know if they were thieves. That was my Go Preacher, yes. He was a bit of a failed Go Preacher.
We have another question here from Mary Sue Moore, and she says, "Hi Tammy, I'm fascinated by the specific language you use in Pearly. I wonder if it's actually logging camp language from your history, like bears larding up for the winter, for example. Thank you."
Hi, Mary Sue. Some of that language is definitely from the camps. I read a lot of and listened to a lot of oral interviews from men who were logging in the 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. So a lot of that language, I had a list of just vocabulary that as what's that? I've never heard this word before. So I kept a lot of those for, especially the slang that they were using that, yeah, I wanted to try to keep that as, and it's a wonderful language. I mean, some of it larding up, I was just like, I love that. And they did use that. That did come from one of the lumbermen.
Excellent. I'm wondering if any of our guests have more questions. What are you reading right now, Tammy? Who's your inspiration, and who are some authors that keep you on your toes?
Who are some authors that keep me on my toes? I was just reading Robert Olmsted's Coal Black Horse, which is really wonderful. He can really write horses. He's really wonderful. I'm looking at my bookshelf because as soon as you ask me, then I'm going to forget what books. And I've been reading a lot of I'm going through John Cheever's short stories right now. So so I've been really enjoying that. I've been reading a lot of short stories actually. Maybe it's just the time of the year because the book came out, and so I've been picking up a lot. Amanda Peters, she has a new Night of the Long Moon. So I have that to take this week with me. So that will be my new book to read, which I'm really looking forward to because she's such a wonderful writer. So
I loved The Berry Pickers.
so good.
So good.
So good. Yes.
Yeah, we're doing an event, the bookstore. We have Indigenous Peoples Day here in the States, which is next Monday, which used to be known as, well, it was a different holiday for Columbus Day, but we're very fortunate to have a very active community who cares about the Indigenous here. And so we're appearing at a festival that celebrates Indigenous people. And we had to cull some of the books because we had so many, which is a beautiful problem to have.
That is a beautiful problem. That makes me happy.
Yeah. Especially kids' books. We had a ton of kids' books, which,
Wonderful.
let's keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we have one more question here from Rachel. Obviously, this story is historical fiction and based in some truth, but curious if there are any fictional characters who inspired Pearly.
Some fictional characters that inspired Pearly. Rachel, she's my lovely agent. She's asking me a hard question. I think all the characters that I read as a younger person, as a kid, like a Pippi Longstockings, a Scout, any of those, Sarah Crew, those really strong girls. There weren't so many of them in literature when, coming out of the 70s, but the ones that did, they had that quirkiness. They didn't, like Pippi Longstockings, she'd be climbing a tree. She doesn't care about any, like, what she's looking. She doesn't care about her clothes. She doesn't care if she tears something. And so those I think I was sort of channeling some of those characters that I really enjoyed when I was young and reading, those chapter books and some of those Anne of Green Gables, like Anne, any of they're all such wonderful characters for when you're young because they're rebellious in a lot of ways, I think. So I try to channel books that I really enjoyed when I was a kid and those kind of spunky characters. I wanted
Love
her.
it. Love it. And that was actually our Rachel from Belmont Books who posed that
Oh.
question. So I wanted to show everyone, I got a copy, our bookstore owner gave me a copy to share with you all tonight. This is Wild Brother, Strangest of the True Stories from the North Woods. So this is the original William Lyman Underwood book, he wrote the stories. And he wrote the
That's
story of Bruno.
wonderful. Oh, yours
Yeah.
is much better. I think mine is maybe on print on demand, so the photos are
Yeah,
very good.
this is
Your photos
this
are
is
wonderful.
this is the original one. I
Yeah.
think Kathy got this on, I don't know if she said she bought it online, maybe A Libris or something. But
Okay.
it's beautiful and it has a ton of photographs in it.
Yeah, I love those photos.
This is the original Ursula and her
Ursula.
mom.
Yeah, Mrs. Weldon.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Very
he took some
cool.
really wonderful pictures of Bruno. You could tell that they had a very he had very much a love for the bear.
Yeah. The silver spoon was real. They had sent
Yeah.
the family a silver spoon, and apparently William sent the family money. So he went around and talked, showed his photographs and did a lot of talking, nature talks, and he collected money and sent it to them. And stayed in touch with them, I think, for a very long time. So
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then that's so I have like the song catcher. She's doing that in my book. She does talks about Bruno, and those are the ones people are most interested in, and she sends money home. And I think that Mr. Underwood, he kept a relationship between them. He helped them with hospital bills, and they were so poor, the Weldons, in the real story, that he was very supportive of them. But Bruno was that conduit between
Mhm.
those two families meeting, which is really lovely.
Okay. Have you been giving talks and are you getting tired of talking about him yet or?
No, I will never get tired of talking about him.
Well, it's a beautiful book. Checking to see if there's any more questions. If any of our guests have questions you'd like to ask of Tammy. I know we started a couple minutes late. I hope it's okay if we run a couple minutes over, Tammy.
Sure.
It's just a beautiful story, and I can tell that you're a poet. I got lost in some of the descriptive language, especially of the environment and just the trees and the seasons. And I really felt like I was there. And it's a
Oh, thank
wonderful
you.
story. And we so appreciate you spending some time with us this evening.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me and this connection we have. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Do you ever get down to the States? Are you in the Boston area at all?
I do. My mother lives in Maine, so I'm going down next week. My husband and I will be going down to visit with her. So, and I grew up, in a border town, so I have family in Maine, and my husband's from Colorado, so we do get to the States, but I haven't been to Boston in a while. I really like Boston too, so
Awesome. Well, we're a good book town and a good bookstore town. So
well, if I get there, I will be stopping
tell
by.
your publicist to send you on tour in Boston and come and visit us. We'll introduce you to our Bruno. But we
I
loved
want
your
to see that giant stuffed Bruno. I want to hang out with him.
Oh, I have pictures. I'm just for some reason I can't seem to post some stuff. I'll send you some photos
Yes,
that
please.
you can use going forward. Are you doing more speaking in the near future? Are you out on the road, or are you get a little respite for a bit?
Next week I will be in Portland, Maine at Barnes and Noble, and I'll be doing a reading there. So that will be fun. And then I'll be in New York the next day for the Barnes and Noble Discover Prize. But I don't think I'll be reading. I don't think so. I'll just be meeting other writers who are
Excellent.
wonderful writers.
Well, that sounds super exciting. We
Yeah.
will look for your next book, and anytime you get down to this neck of the woods, we would love to have you come to the store. And thank you so much for a wonderful book and a really terrific discussion. And we
Yeah.
can't wait to see what comes next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. It's been really fun.
Okay.
Thanks to everyone who
Thanks everyone for joining us this evening.
take
Good
care.
night, Pearly Everlasting.
Good night.
Bye now.
See you.